Hi friends, my name is Darren Gerdes. I do daily updates on Ukraine. Today I want to address this issue. Why are the Russians failing? There's a legitimate failure of leadership, and this is right up my alley. As a management professor, I see what's going on right now in the headlines today in Technicolor. So stay with me. I'll try to address this question as we go through the news today. I want to first talk about yesterday. I had a special interview with Orest Zub. If you don't know who this is, you want to watch that interview, or at very least, go to his channel and watch some of his videos. I would start with looking out what happened in Bucha and Arpin, or other videos like that, just to get a feel for what actually has happened on the ground. You will see with your own eyes the destruction, and I urge you to go do that. Okay, now let me go forward. So this first article that I want to address, this is Business Insider, which I usually don't do, but it's a condensation of a New York Times article, and that's why I chose this one. Russian soldiers drafted to Ukraine were told they wouldn't have to actually fight anyone, a report says. Many of them were swiftly killed, right? So their leadership is lying to them about what's actually going to happen on the ground. That's the only way they got them there, because if they told them the truth, they would have been like, I'm going to Georgia, or I'm going across the border somewhere else. Russian commanders told soldiers drafted to Ukraine that they would never see combat, only for them to be killed in battle shortly thereafter. They severely lacked food and equipment and had no maps, medical kits, working walkie-talkies, or enough bullets. Okay, let me pause. So what I would tell my students in class, and I built leadership programs, a master's in leadership. I'm working on a bachelor's in leadership right now. Like, your job as a leader is not to do the work itself. It's to get work done through other people. And that means that you clear a path for them to get the work done, and you equip them with what they need to be able to do it. And if you're not doing that, you're failing as a leader. That's your job as a leader. But doesn't always work out. However, they said that they were not afraid because their commanders reassured them that they wouldn't be in actual combat, according to the Times. So your job is not to lie to your people. It's to prepare them for what they need so that they can do their job, and the Russians are failing that miserably. This isn't war. One of these guys told a reporter from a military hospital, it's the destruction of the Russian people by their own commanders. And that's a really profound summation of what's happened. Let's look at the British military intelligence update. Here's the British Ministry of Defense talking about this. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced the establishment of 2 frontline creative brigades tasked with raising the morale of troops deployed in the special military operation. I credit them for recognizing that they have a morale issue, but their solution is not going to work. Russian media reports that the ranks will include opera singers, actors, and circus performers. That's not what they need. What they need are the essentials, and they're not provided the essentials. This follows a recent campaign by the Russian Ministry of Defense to encourage the public to donate musical instruments deployed to soldiers. Military music have a long history, they say. Fragile morale almost certainly continues to be a significant vulnerability across much of the Russian force. However, soldiers' concerns primarily focus on high casualty rates. That means safety. Poor leadership. That means we don't know what we're doing, or if we can trust you. Pay problems. Lack of equipment and ammunition. We're not supplying you with what you need. Lack of clarity about what the war's objectives are. The motivation's not there. The Creative Brigade's efforts are unlikely to substantially alleviate these concerns, and I think that's absolutely right. Everything I know about leadership in my discipline tells me that this will not fix that. And that is that they're not doing the normal military things that need to be done: equipping, training, producing soldiers who know what their mission is and how to advance as soldiers. All that stuff's not being done properly. Okay, the BBC also had something about this. It's basically some of the same stuff. Russian defense minister, but they added this extra thing that here is about the vocalists and the musicians and the frontline creatives. But then they added the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, visited frontline troops in Ukraine, the government said. No, the government said it, but what did he do? And there was a picture in another article about him in a helicopter or a plane or something looking down at the front line. In a statement posted to Telegram, the defense ministry said Mr. Shoigu flew around the areas deployment of the troops and checked the advanced positions of the Russian units in the zone of the special military operation. Well, he couldn't have come that close without being shot down. So we'll see where exactly he was over time if they release anything more about this. It added that he spoke with the troops on the front line at a, quote, command post. Command posts are a little bit further back, so not exactly the front line, but okay, let's give him some benefit of the doubt for at least being in Ukraine, unlike Putin. But the BBC cannot confirm whether the visit took place or whether Mr. Shoigu visited Ukraine itself. Okay, now, RT was talking about how the defense minister inspects the front line. Oh, here's the picture. How the defense minister inspects the front line troops. The ministry didn't say exactly when or where the visit took place, but published a clip of Shoigu's helicopter flyby and an aerial view of some Russian fortifications. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how much it is. But when your leader is not willing to do the same thing that you are tasked with doing, if he says, do this, I'm not going to do it, but be safe up there because I'm going to be back here, it doesn't really inspire confidence. And this is part and parcel of the Russian system. Okay. Euro news. The heating is restored in Kyiv. On the other side of this, the Ukrainians have been incredibly innovative, and they have been incredibly persistent, and they're focused. They know what they need to do. They know that this is an existential struggle, and they got the heating all restored in 2 days, or 3 days. What was it? Friday that there was a great barrage. It's Sunday now. Heating has been fully restored to Kyiv. The city is restoring all services after the latest shelling. All sources of heat supply work. This, knowing full well that another barrage is right around the corner, but they're going to make it work in the meantime anyway. And I think that's a big difference in the way that they are acting and proceeding. They don't have morale issues. Now, this was interesting. Our weapons are computers. Ukrainian coders aim to gain a battlefield advantage. What he's looking at here is a deep state map. It's the same deep state map that I show, that Dennis Davidov shows, and other military bloggers and video vloggers on YouTube. But what they were talking about down here was how they're actually going about doing it. I talked about the innovation, and the innovation doesn't come from bureaucracy. It comes largely from the market. Watch this. The biggest differences between the Russian army and the Ukrainian army are horizontal links between the units. Now, if I understand what he's saying correctly, and I might not, okay, so I'm not a military strategist. So this might have some kind of deeper military or specific military meaning, but this horizontal communication, being able to talk to each other in a flat kind of organization, provides agility. And this agility is what the Ukrainians are using to beat the Russians, who have a very top-down, layered kind of thing where they have to get permission all the way up the chain, and the generals on top tell everybody what to do, and everybody just executes, as opposed to being able to interact and react in real time. Like other soldiers, the Innovation Center, he provided only his first name. We are winning mainly because Ukrainians are naturally horizontal communicators. That is, they're willing to eschew the rank issue for the sake of speed and actually getting the job done. Delta is run by the Innovative Center, whose staff have been drawn to a large degree from volunteer organization of drone operators and programmers called Aerial Reconnaissance. And it goes on, these were not bureaucrats. And this is really important, that they're not bureaucrats. They're not just like Rule 67BC says whatever. They're not doing that. These were not bureaucrats from the defense ministry. They were from the corporate sector who were mobilized to serve in the army, she said. They started to make Delta with their own minds and hands because they had this culture of agile development. The creative process has a short circle. You develop it, you test it, you launch it. So this is really exciting to me as a management professor. I'm seeing like, yes, this is what's going to give them a significant edge in being able to run around their opponents and do it in record time. And it goes on and on. All that information is embedded into layers on the Delta battlefield map, which is kept alive and accessible to its military users through Starlink satellite communications, and the Russians are very far behind in their ability to keep up. That's the difference in leadership. Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to fun with Russian state media. First article, at least one dead, several injured following a Ukrainian strike in Russia. Remember, this is an RT and it's targeted to the Russian population. Our air defense system, and it shows some of the shrapnel and stuff. Our air defense system worked over Belgorod and Belgorod region, he wrote. Okay. Gladakov also said one person was killed on the outskirts of the regional capital and another one was wounded. A poultry farm was damaged. And he added, here's the poultry farm. And okay, if you read this article, you get a sense that the Ukrainians are just indiscriminately shooting at Russians because they're those kind, you know how those Nazis are after all, right? Okay, next, Pope calls Ukraine conflict a global war. Russia has been saying that the proxy war has actually been waged against it in neighboring country by US and NATO. And they keep going on and on about how Russia is at war with NATO. Russia's not at war with NATO. If NATO is in the fight, they have two hands tied behind their backs at this point. They're simply giving a little bit of help in weapons and materials, but they're not involved. If they were full on involved, this would be a very big, different kind of thing. I don't see an end to the fighting in Ukraine in the near future because this is a global war. Let's not forget this, said the Pope. There are many hands stirring up the war pot. And now, I don't blame the Pope for calling for peace, but I don't want him to be calling for peace without justice. And he needs to stay on that. We need peace, but we need justice in order to prevail to keep the peace ongoing in the future. Okay, now while we're at that, there's a difference between the way that the Russians see this and the way that the West sees this. And these next two articles will show you some of that difference. And then I'm going to show you an article from China, which is really, really interesting, that kind of backs up some of what I've been saying. Okay, what will happen to the ethnic Russians in Donbass and Crimea if Ukraine and NATO emerge victorious in the current conflict? Well, let's see. What has happened to Ukrainians when Russians came in here has been a disaster. Brutal treatment. Oh, look at that. Brutal treatment of collaborators could extend to millions of people. Okay, now they're talking about brutal treatment of collaborators. It's true. Collaborators will be punished with sentences, right? With jail time, with things along those lines. It would be very wise to flee to Russia if you love Russia that much. If, when Ukraine comes in, that's okay. You can do that. And that's how you will avoid the punishment that might be coming. Here, 9 years ago, about 8.5 million people lived in Donbass and Crimea, according to Ukrainian statistics. Most of them spoke Russian as their native language. Even Zelensky spoke Russian as their native language. Ukrainians didn't have an issue with speaking Russian. It was as natural as speaking Ukrainian in some parts of the country. Many of them identified as ethnic Russians. All of them are now considered by Moscow to be Russian citizens, and only by Moscow and North Korea and like Syria or Iran or something like that. But that's about it in the world that considers them Russian citizens. Thus, if the NATO-backed regime in Kyiv reconquers those regions, then there are fears that the retribution against the locals could be ruthless and bloody. And that's true. And I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that they simply, use legal means to prosecute people that need to be prosecuted appropriately. But I understand why they're worrying about it, because this is what they do to their opponents. When NATO and the Kyiv regime talk about liberating Crimea and Donbass, what they really mean is they're determined to eradicate the ethnic identity of the local Russian population and to weaken, if not destroy, the Russian Federation. Now, I'm going to do something fun. Just for the sake of kicks and giggles, let's look at this and let's just replace Ukraine with Russia. Okay? When NATO, when Russia talks about liberating Crimea and Donbass, what they really mean is that they're determined to eradicate the ethnic identity of local Ukrainians and weaken, if not destroy, Ukraine. That's right. This is what they do all the time. They say what their opponents are going to do is do this. But there is actually a potential legitimately for retribution after this, and I hope it doesn't go sideways like that. But there's some bad blood. I mean, like intergenerational, multi-generational hatred against Russia at this point, which wasn't there just 5-10 years. Well, no, we got to go back before 2014. Before 2014, that bad blood wasn't there. 80% had kind of warmish, happy feelings toward Russia in Ukraine. and now it's down to 2%. NATO and Kyiv officials are obsessed with seizing full control of these disputed regions, and there's no limit to the blood and treasure they're willing to sacrifice toward that goal. Again, Russia is in the same place. Under international law, it's amazing to my mind that they even talk about international law when they wantonly violate it. But then they're going to use it to try to say that their citizens need to be protected. Moscow has a right to protect its citizens no matter where they may be, or whether we just call them citizens when they're really not. On February 21st, 2014, with U.S. support, a violent insurrection in Kyiv toppled the democratically elected president Viktor Yanukovych. Okay, what actually happened was there was a peaceful protest, and the Ukrainian president, who was very Russian-leaning, started abusing his own citizens, firing on them, and that's what the violence was. And then there was fighting back to that. But go back and read about it, and you'll find that that's what's going on. But they always talk about it in this way, as if, Ukraine started it and the CIA was behind it. And it's not really like that. Today, Kyiv and NATO insisted that they're fighting totalitarian Russia to protect the rules-based order, yet NATO refuses to recognize these referendum results because they're made up. If you had free and fair elections, and let's say Crimea wanted to go, and Ukraine was like, look, if you want to go, you want to go. That's a different thing than seizing it at gunpoint, holding a sham election, and then saying, see, they had referendum elections. It's free and fair. The right to self-determination is a fundamental principle of international law enshrined in the United Nations Charter. But that was not a free and fair election. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that you see all the time in RT. Here's another one with the same thing, and I only want to highlight a couple things. 1 year ago, Russia gave the West a last chance to prevent a full-blown conflict. What went wrong? Toward the end of 2021, the Kremlin made an attempt to push the West to negotiate on Russia's long-standing political and defense grievances. And so Putin, he tried to reason with them. Vladimir Putin probably reasoned along these lines. After so many years of ignoring our wishes and convictions, let's give it one last chance. Okay, that's what he's saying. Okay, now, and then they ask, is anyone in the West kicking themselves right now? Because, after not listening to this one last chance, well, we had to do this. We were pushed into it. An ultimatum can only be accepted by great powers, and even more so by superpowers, as a result of military defeat. Again, it's like this weird funhouse mirror kind of thing. That's what's going to happen. When Russia has a military defeat, they'll be pushed into coming to terms with Ukraine. After 1 year, how should we assess the outcome of our country? Based literally on what was said in the document, the main outcome is that the political military situation has changed radically. Consequently, Russia's dissatisfaction with the previous state of affairs has been partially satiated. As it was, it will no longer be. NATO will not take further expansion lightly, realizing that nothing will happen in response point of view no longer applies. Actually, what's going to happen is that Ukraine will become part of NATO after Russia has to capitulate. Now, I don't know what will happen there. My crystal ball is very cloudy. So what I would speculate is Ukraine will become part of NATO. I don't think there's any possibility that they will not after this, because the only reason that we have this war right now is because they're not NATO. That's the only thing. So Ukraine will become NATO. They might come up with a compromise of we won't put X kind of weapons, like nuclear weapons, in Ukraine proper or something along those lines. But it'll still be NATO. If you come onto this territory, you'll still have a problem. That's where we are. All right, last article. And this is in the South China Morning Post. Just look at the headline. China must prepare for Russia weakened by Ukraine, analysts say. That is Chinese analysts saying that they're preparing for a day when there's a weakened Russia and we kind of have to pick up the slack in the region. That's the South China Morning Post. They said China must brace for a weaker post-Putin Russia, and then China is going to have to pick up the slack. But they also said it's going to be a long war and expect that. Okay, that's where we are. Thank you for your time. I hope this helped you understand what's going on in Russia, in Ukraine, why Russia's doing what they're doing, why the Ukrainians are doing so much better than punching above their weight. And thank you for being the kind of person, if you're still listening to me, that cares about Ukraine.